The day my daughter-in-law said I was no longer needed did not begin with shouting. It began quietly, like most painful moments do. I was standing in the kitchen early that morning. The house was still asleep. The sun had not fully risen. I liked those hours. They reminded me of when my son was little, and I would wake up early just to prepare his lunch and make sure everything was perfect before he went to school. I had lived in that house longer than anyone else. I had raised my son there. I had watched him take his first steps in that hallway. I had cried in that living room when his father passed away. I had prayed in that bedroom for strength when life felt heavy. That house was not just walls to me. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was love. After my son got married, everything changed slowly. Not in ways that could be pointed out easily. Not in ways that made people gasp. It was small things. Quiet things. Like fewer conversations. Like doors closing softly instead of staying open. Like laughter happening in another room without me. I told myself it was normal. I told myself this was how life worked. Children grow up. They build their own families. Mothers step back. I believed that if I stayed kind and helpful and quiet, everything would be fine. I tried my best to be useful. I cooked. I cleaned. I stayed out of the way. I asked before touching anything. I smiled even when my chest felt tight. I reminded myself that love meant adjusting. My daughter-in-law was not cruel at first. She was polite, distant but polite. She thanked me when I cooked. She nodded when I spoke. But there was always a wall, invisible yet strong. I felt it every day. My son changed too. He spoke less. He listened less. His eyes were often on his phone or on her. When I talked about my day, he would smile briefly and say he was tired. I did not blame him. I told myself marriage was busy. One afternoon I overheard them talking in their room. I was not trying to listen. Their voices just carried through the hallway. She said something about needing space, about wanting privacy, about starting their own life properly. I stood still and listened quietly. My heart beat faster. I wondered what that meant for me. That evening she asked me to sit down. Her voice was calm, too calm. My son sat beside her but did not look at me. I remember folding my hands in my lap the way I used to when I was nervous. She said she hoped I would understand. She said she appreciated everything I had done. Then she said the words that changed everything. She said I was no longer needed the way I used to be. She said they wanted to manage things on their own now. She said maybe it was time for me to focus on myself. I looked at my son. I waited for him to say something. Anything. He stayed silent. In that silence something inside me cracked. I nodded. I smiled. I told her I understood. My voice sounded calm even though my hands were shaking. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I listened to the house breathe. Every sound felt different, like I was already a guest. I thought about all the years I had given, all the meals, all the nights I stayed awake when my son was sick, all the sacrifices no one saw. And for the first time in my life I wondered where I belonged now. I did not cry loudly. I did not confront anyone. I just lay there and let the truth settle slowly. Sometimes the deepest pain does not come from harsh words. It comes from being quietly pushed aside. And that was only the beginning. The days after that conversation moved slowly. Every morning felt heavier than the one before. I woke up earlier than everyone else, not because I needed to, but because sleep no longer stayed with me. I would sit at the kitchen table holding a warm cup of tea and listen to the quiet house. That quiet felt different now. It was no longer peaceful. It felt like I was slowly fading from the place I once belonged. I tried to continue as normal. I still cooked meals. I still cleaned the house. But something had shifted. No one asked anymore. No one noticed either. Plates were left untouched. Food went cold. Conversations happened without me even being aware they had started. My daughter-in-law began rearranging things. Cabinets I had organized for years were changed. Photos were moved. My small routines were disrupted one by one. She did not ask me. She did not need to. It was her house now, or at least that is how it felt. One afternoon I reached for a pot I had used for years and could not find it. I asked her quietly where it was. She looked surprised as if she had forgotten I existed. She said she had donated it because it was old. I nodded. I did not tell her that pot was older than her marriage, that it carried memories of my son sitting on the counter as a child asking for another bite. My son remained distant. When I tried to talk to him alone, he seemed uncomfortable. He avoided eye contact. He said things like everything is fine, or please do not make things difficult. That hurt more than anger ever could. I started eating alone more often. They had their meals together at different times. Laughter drifted into the hallway and stopped when I entered the room. I became careful with my steps, careful with my words, careful with my presence. I felt like a shadow moving through my own life, One evening I overheard my daughter-in-law speaking on the phone. She said living with an older parent was exhausting. She said it was time to move forward. She said some people do not know when to let go. I stood behind the door and felt my chest tighten. I wanted to knock. I wanted to say I had nowhere else to go. I wanted to remind her I had already let go of everything else in my life for my son, but I stayed quiet. That night I packed a small bag, not because I was leaving but because I wanted to feel prepared. I folded my clothes carefully. I held each item like it mattered, because at that moment it felt like the only things that still belonged to me. I sat on my bed and looked around the room. It was once full of warmth. Now it felt temporary. Like a hotel room you do not plan to stay in long. I realized something painful then. Being unwanted does not always come with cruelty. Sometimes it comes with politeness, with calm voices, with gentle smiles that hide distance. And the hardest part was not that my daughter-in-law said I was no longer needed. The hardest part was that my son did not say I was still wanted. That silence followed me everywhere. The breaking point did not arrive suddenly. It crept in slowly the way sadness often does. It arrived in moments so small they almost went unnoticed. A forgotten cup on the counter. A door closed without a glance. A conversation that stopped when I entered the room. One evening I came home from a long walk. My legs ached. My chest felt tight. I opened the door quietly and heard laughter from the living room. My son and my daughter-in-law were sitting together watching television. Their voices were relaxed, happy. I stood there for a moment waiting to be noticed. No one looked up. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking. I took a slow breath and walked back into the living room. I sat on the edge of the couch. Still no one spoke. Finally my daughter-in-law glanced at me. Her smile was polite but tired. She said they were watching something and needed quiet. She did not ask how my walk was. She did not ask if I wanted to join. She just turned back to the screen. Something inside me finally broke. Not in anger, not in tears, but in understanding. I stood up slowly and went to my room. I closed the door and sat on the bed. The silence in that room felt heavier than ever before. I looked around and realized how little space I truly had left. How small my world had become. I thought about my husband. About how he used to say that kindness should never cost you your dignity. I had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way. That night I cried quietly into my pillow. Not because I was angry at them, but because I was grieving myself. The woman I used to be. The mother who felt secure. The person who knew where she belonged. The next morning my daughter-in-law knocked on my door. She asked if I could move some of my things. She said her mother would be visiting soon, and might stay for a while. She said they needed the space. I looked at her. I waited for my son to speak. He stood behind her silent, his eyes on the floor. In that moment the truth became clear. There was no room for me anymore. I nodded slowly. I said of course. My voice sounded calm even though my heart was racing. She thanked me and walked away. I sat there for a long time after they left. I did not move. I did not cry. I just stared at the wall and let reality settle. I realized I had been slowly leaving already. My presence had been fading day by day. This was just the final confirmation. Later that afternoon I began packing properly. Not a small bag this time. I folded my clothes carefully. I placed my personal items in boxes. Photos, letters, memories of a life lived quietly in service of others. My son passed by the doorway once. He paused. He looked inside. He did not come in. He did not ask where I was going. That silence hurt more than any words ever could. As night fell, I sat among the boxes and understood something I had been afraid to admit. Love should not make you feel unwanted, and staying somewhere you are no longer needed slowly breaks your spirit. That was the night I decided I would not disappear quietly anymore. Leaving the house did not feel dramatic. There were no arguments, no tears at the door. I carried my boxes quietly and placed them in the back of a small car a friend had lent me. My son stood in the doorway. He watched but did not speak. My daughter-in-law stayed inside. The door closed softly behind me. I did not look back. The first night away was the hardest. I stayed in a small room that belonged to a distant relative. The bed was narrow. The walls were bare. The silence felt unfamiliar. I lay awake listening to my own breathing. I felt lost and free at the same time. In the morning I woke up early out of habit. I made myself tea and sat by the window. The sunlight touched my face gently. For the first time in a long while the quiet did not feel heavy. It felt open. I realized how much of myself I had given away without noticing. My time, my energy, my voice. I had confused love with endurance. I had believed that staying quiet meant staying strong. But strength, I learned, is not always silent. Sometimes strength is choosing yourself when no one else does. Days passed slowly. I organized my small space. I went for walks. I read books I had forgotten about. I cooked meals just for myself. Simple meals. Warm meals. Meals that did not need approval. People began to notice me again. Neighbors said hello. The woman at the store remembered my name. These small acknowledgments filled a space I did not know was empty. One afternoon my phone rang. It was my son. His voice sounded unsure. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was fine. Truly fine. He paused. He did not expect that answer. He asked if I needed anything. I said no. Not with bitterness. Just honesty. The call ended quietly. After that the calls came more often. Short conversations at first. Then longer ones. He began asking questions. About my days. About my health. About my plans. I answered calmly. I did not chase. I did not accuse. Distance had done what presence could not. I noticed a change in myself too. I stood taller. I spoke clearer. I no longer felt the need to explain my worth. I understood that being needed is not the same as being valued. One evening I looked at my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired but peaceful. Sad but stronger. I realized that leaving had not ended my life. It had quietly begun a new chapter. I was no longer waiting to be included. I was living. And somewhere far away I knew a shift was happening too. Silence has a way of speaking when words fail. Living alone gave me time. Time I had not allowed myself before. Time without expectations. Time without being careful of how much space I took. At first the quiet scared me. Then slowly it began to comfort me. I noticed how my shoulders relaxed. How my breath felt deeper. How my thoughts no longer raced to please anyone. I realized how tired I had been for so many years without knowing it. Every object in my small room belonged to me. Nothing needed permission. Nothing needed approval. I placed my cup where I liked. I left a book open on the table. I slept when I was tired, and woke when my body was ready. These small freedoms felt like gifts. I thought often about my son, about the boy he used to be, about the man he had become. I wondered where I had lost him, or if I ever truly had. I knew he loved me, but love without courage can still cause harm, and that truth was hard to accept. One afternoon he came to visit again. He looked older somehow, not in age but in awareness. He sat across from me quietly. He did not rush to speak. That told me something had changed. He said he had been thinking a lot, about his childhood, about everything I had done for him, about the way I had disappeared without complaint. He said it scared him. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not comfort him. I let him speak. He said he did not know how to balance being a husband and being a son. He said he thought I would understand. I told him gently that understanding should never mean disappearing. I told him I needed him to hear something important. I said I raised you to be kind, not quiet. I raised you to stand up, not step back. And when you stayed silent, you taught me that my pain did not matter. He cried then, quiet tears, the kind men try to hide. I did not rush to wipe them away. I let them fall. That moment was not about forgiveness. It was about truth. I told him my boundaries clearly. I said I would not live where I felt unwanted. I would not stay silent to keep peace. I would not accept being treated like a burden. I said I loved him. But love did not mean sacrifice without dignity. He nodded. Again and again. He said he understood. I believed he was trying. After that our relationship changed slowly. He called before visiting. He listened when I spoke. He did not rush me. He did not defend silence anymore. I felt safer with him. Not because everything was healed, but because honesty had finally entered the room. I also noticed something else. My strength did not make me hard. It made me gentle in a new way. I no longer needed to prove my kindness. I chose it freely. Boundaries did not push love away. They allowed it to breathe. I began volunteering a little, helping others who felt forgotten. I listened to their stories. I saw myself in them. And I realized how many people live quietly in pain. Helping them healed something in me too. I was no longer waiting to be needed. I was living with purpose. And still the final chapter had not arrived yet. Because healing is not just about leaving. Sometimes it is about what returns to you after you choose yourself. As more time passed, I began to understand that healing does not arrive all at once. It comes in quiet waves. Some days felt light and hopeful. Other days felt heavy without warning. I learned not to fight either. I allowed myself to feel everything without judgment. Sadness no longer scared me. It reminded me that I had loved deeply. And love always leaves marks even when it changes shape. My son continued to show up differently. Not perfectly but sincerely. He no longer assumed my presence. He asked. He waited. He listened. These were things I had not realized I needed so badly until they finally appeared. One afternoon he told me something that stayed with me. He said when I left the house felt empty in a way he could not explain. He said the silence felt different. He said he realized then that my quiet presence had always held things together. I did not respond right away. I looked at him and felt both comfort and sadness. Comfort that he finally saw me. Sadness that it took my absence for him to understand. I told him something gently. I said sometimes people only understand the weight of love after it is no longer carrying them. He nodded slowly. He did not argue. My daughter-in-law remained distant but respectful. We were not close, but we were calm, and that was enough. Not every relationship needs to be repaired. Some only need to be released with grace. I stopped replaying old moments in my mind. I stopped asking myself what I could have done differently. I stopped carrying responsibility that was never meant to be mine. I realized I had confused self-sacrifice with goodness. I had believed that disappearing was the price of love. But love should never require you to erase yourself. One evening my son asked if I would ever come back to live with them. His voice was careful, almost afraid of the answer. I took a deep breath before responding. I told him no, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I had built a life that finally felt peaceful. I told him I would always be part of his life, but I would not return to a place where I once felt unwanted. I said that chapter had taught me too much to repeat it. He understood, and that understanding felt like respect. I continued living simply. I took walks. I read books. I cooked meals that reminded me of myself, not of service. I spoke kindly to myself in ways I never had before. Some nights I sat alone and thought about my younger self, the woman who gave everything without question. I did not judge her. I thanked her. She had done the best she could with what she knew. And now I was doing better because I knew more. I learned that motherhood does not end when children grow up, but it does change. And sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is step back and let her child see her as a whole human being, not just a source of comfort. I no longer needed validation. I no longer waited for approval. I belonged to myself. When people asked me if I felt lonely, I smiled. I told them solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness comes from being unseen, and I was finally seeing myself clearly. The pain that once felt unbearable had softened, not because it disappeared, but because it no longer controlled me. I had learned to sit with silence without fear, to speak when my heart asked me to leave when my dignity required it. And if there is one thing I would say to anyone listening to my story, it is this: do not wait to be erased to remember your worth. Do not stay where your presence feels like a burden. Love deeply, but love wisely, and never confuse being needed with being valued. That night as I turned off the light, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from knowing you chose yourself.